We'll start with Drew on this question. As a council member or prospective council member, what is your opinion about ballot box zoning? Why should or shouldn't land use policy decisions be made at the ballot box?
Well, I think in some situations, land use decisions can be made at the ballot box. I mean, land use is at the core of how communities define themselves. I was an urban studies major in college at Columbia, and one of my topics that I researched was municipal formations. And a lot of times, cities would form or break off from each other over land use. There were disagreements as to like how large residential plots would be or what businesses would be zoned for. It's at the core, at the very core of how communities define themselves. So if land use is at the core of how a community defines itself, why not? Why shouldn't the community as a whole get a say in that? Why should we just let, 5 or 7 select people make that decision? Why shouldn't we all vote on that? And so I'm not saying that, the whole community should be voting on someone's use permit or the renovation of someone's house. But when you're talking about land use issues that go to the core of a community, that goes to the core of how a community defines itself, and that will impact all members of that community, you can't sort of explain to me why shouldn't the community get a say in that process, in that decision?
Thank you, Rich.
Yeah, thank you. I actually think that there are always circumstances when initiatives, voter initiatives should be and are good. In land use cases, it's very rare. It's very rare indeed to have people voting on land use issues and those be approved. I don't think it's a good idea in most cases. I don't support initiatives mostly as it is, but land use is very complex. And land use usually requires there to be a couple different parties that are involved. There's usually a developer who has some financing, and there's usually residents who are impacted. And that's how it is, all up and down different states and various places. What that does is pit two different forces against each other, and there has to be negotiation and collaboration between it. When you take that and then you start using the vehicle of voter and ballot boxes to fix those problems, instead of having council meetings and plan commission meetings and public hearings and studies and research and the things that are available to make those decisions, then what you end up doing is codifying a system that allows either a developer to come out and fund an entire election and put ads in every box to try to win that, or you disallow a small business to make changes because they can't afford to have an election. And so they might as well leave because it costs too much money for them to put something on the ballot for a land use that they have to go through. In this case, on M, that's exactly what happens. It puts the power into different people's hands and takes it out of other people who can't afford to go to the election. And it makes use changes based on a judge in City Hall instead of by people who are trained to go through it.
Thank you. Kirsten?
Thank you. I think with ballot box zoning, and you've heard a lot of it already, but land use issues are complicated. They just are. But everybody should have a say and it should be involved. And it's interesting because that's why we did the specific plan. So we did this 6-year process, and people were involved, and people came to meetings. We had over 90 meetings that went on for many hours. And they were productive meetings, and we heard from so many residents from all over the community, from all the neighborhoods. And I think that's a great way to do it. And I want to say now we're doing our general plan update. And the general plan update also has a steering committee with people from all over the community and council members and planning commissioners and other commissioners. And that's a great way to get input, get feedback, have people come to meetings, give discussion, and formulate some proposal. And so that's what we did with the specific plan. Ballot box zoning, again, I just think it's a very complicated issue, and you can see it even with Measure M now. There are so many twists and turns, and if you modify housing or office space and you put in more retail or medical, your traffic counts change tremendously. So things are thought through, and we have a transparent, open process where we can all come together and talk about it, and I think that's important. the specific plan also could be changed, and we can look at it, and when we met last, I can't remember if it was last Tuesday, but we looked at them, we're going to have an EIR on traffic issues for the Stanford project, so we'll be looking, it turned out the traffic counts were higher than we anticipated, and that's great, we know it, and we're going to work on it.
Thank you, Peter.
So I also wanted to concur. The difficulties about ballot box zoning is, there's no question, I think you're all finding out about this, that zoning is very complicated, and you push or change one thing and it has a ripple effect, which can be intended or unintended consequences. So as Kirsten was mentioning, Measure M talks about reducing the office space and putting by half and putting caps on that. Well, that means it doesn't change the overall amount of size or height or space of development. So that means the alternate uses will just come in, and obviously there are different opinions about what those alternate uses will do in terms of, for example, traffic. There a really great example is through the independent consultant that analyzed the Measure M and looked at a lot of the different issues and ramifications. And what's important to keep in mind is the specific plan went through Planning Commission meetings and is vetted through a process in order to address those. Secondly, ballot box zoning also penalizes small parcels because it's now only the big parcels that can afford to do a referendum. Third point is, if you feel confused now, how about being confused every 2 years? Finally, it discourages investment to other cities. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Kelly?
You know, I don't think it's that complicated. I think voters are smart. Voters in Palo Alto had Measure D and defeated that proposal, and now the developer has come back with a smaller proposal. I think, you know, an initiative is obviously, it's a ton of work, and it's only used as a last resort. The residents, Save Menlo, went to 60 meetings to try to get the city council to close these loopholes that are allowing this out-of-character development and that doesn't match the vision of the Menlo Park residents. So, you know, in this case, it's, I think, completely reasonable to let voters have a say in the future of our city. You know, Measure M, the specific plan is 356 pages. Measure M changes about 15 lines of that. And I think the most likely scenario, if I'm on the council, voters are not going to be asked to vote on individual projects. It's up to the city council to plan for the future wave of development of this city. So now that 80% of the commercial development may go to these two projects, the city council should be looking ahead and saying, well, what is the next wave of development? Let's run an EIR, find out what the impacts of that are, and let the residents vote on that and see whether or not they want the city to continue to grow in that manner.
Thank you. Kristen?
So I think I think the incumbents have sort of laid out the reasons why they're sort of against ballot box barring, and I thank Drew for sort of presenting the other side of it as a general answer. Specifically, though, we're really talking about Measure M. And while I understand that people might have a principled objection to having this restriction placed on council, in this particular case, I think it's not as concerning as it might be in other cases for the reason that Kelly mentioned, and that is there is already provision in the specific plan to reassess the caps when we hit the trigger of 80% of the threshold. And we are at, by my calculations, 79%, by other calculations at 77%, but I'm not going to quibble. And so that process would reevaluate that threshold by looking at an EIR. So we're really looking at this case with Measure M is it too much to ask that we have a vote to approve that? This is in the context of the fact that we just approved 1 million square feet of development along El Camino Real. And so to sort of re-up those caps in a short period of time, I don't think it's too much to ask our residents to weigh in on that. And if we as council can't put forward a proposal that our residents can line up behind and vote yes for, then I think that says something about the proposal that we're making as council. So in this particular case, I don't think it's as troubling as the incumbents think it is, although I certainly understand the principle of the objection to that from a voter's perspective.
Thank you.